Today we're going to be doing some serious car journalism and buying advice. Now, if you've been on the market for a Lamborghini Urus, but you've been put off by its £170,000 price tag, which is quite steep, you might be interested in the car I have today. Now, this is an Audi SQ8, and not only is it built on the same platform as the Lamborghini Urus, it also comes with the same engine, albeit in a slightly different state of tune. And it costs less than half the price at £80,000. So what else do we get for our money? Well, we're just about to find out, but you know the drill by now. Why not leave us a like and subscribe for more awesome videos just like this one. Now, there are three different types of Audi Q8s. There's the normal Q8, then there's this, the SQ8, and above that is the RS Q8. But don't think of the SQ8 necessarily as just a warmed up version of the Q8. There's some serious horsepower going underneath the hood, which we'll get onto in just a minute. But I first thought we'd start off with going through the design differences between this and a normal Q8, and there aren't really any, because the entry-level Q8 is an S-line, and this being an S, they look pretty much identical. That being said, ours is a Vorsprung. It's the top spec version of the SQ8. That means we get this gloss black surround to the grille and also gloss black around the brake ducts down here. But it's also worth bearing in mind that you can get that on the normal Q8 as well. Now, entry-level Q8s and SQ8s get a grey finish around here that doesn't look nearly as nice. I'm not always a big fan of gloss black everything, but it looks really good on the Q8 and SQ8. Now, all SQ8s come with 22-inch wheels, but there are actually several different designs. These ones come as standard on the Vorsprung, but you can spec them further down the range if you would like. Gloss black on the wing mirror covers. And just to point this out, the Q8 and the Q7 are essentially the same cars underneath, but what sets them apart is the coupe-like roofline of the Q8, whereas the Q7 continues on for a more SUV-ish look. So the Q8 is designed to be the sports SUV or sports utility vehicle, whereas the Q7 is for taking the family out and about. And this section right here is very Urus. At the back, we have one slight difference to go over between a regular Q8 and this, and it is the quad exhaust system. And it's real. Now, I drove the diesel version of this a couple of years ago, and I believe it was fake, but on here, it is completely real. The only thing is that the exhaust tip covers are fake. The ones underneath it are kind of like pea shooters, and it does look a little bit on the cheap side. But hey, we'll take our wins, they're real. And one thing I just think completes the Q8 and SQ8 really well is this black strip across the back of the car. There's something very rally about it. The SQ8 weighs nearly 2.5 tons, so it needs some serious stopping power to slow it down. Good job then that we have these absolutely massive S brakes at the front. And I think if this is what you get on the S, I can't imagine what you'd get on the RS. They would absolutely fill the rims. Now, I believe in Germany you can actually get carbon ceramics as well, however they're not available in the UK, but carbon ceramics are usually incredibly expensive to add to the options list. Now, we also have adaptive air suspension on every car in the range, and that's really good because it means when you're driving along you can have the car nice and comfortable to smooth out any bumps, and then when you're really going for it on a B road you can stiffen the car up and it actually lowers it. In fact, we'll put a shot down of the car going up and down. Now, if you go for a Vorsprung, you can also get active anti-roll. So not only does the adaptive air suspension keep the car nice and low, the active anti-roll will try and keep it as flat as possible. Again, we're chucking around a lot of weight and it does a really impressive job of keeping that as flat as possible through the corners. Now, one thing to also aid the car's agility is all-wheel steering, and every car gets it. So what that means is at lower speeds, the rear wheels will steer in an opposite direction to the front wheels to essentially narrow down the turning circle, and it makes the car feel a lot smaller than it actually is. But at higher speeds, they'll actually move in the same direction as the front wheels, and that's designed to improve stability. When the SQ8 first came out a couple of years ago, it was only available with a diesel engine producing an alright 429 brake horsepower and a massive 900 Newton meters of torque, which is hypercar levels of torque. The only problem is nobody likes diesels anymore, so Audi got rid of it and has instead replaced it with this thing, a 4-litre twin turbocharged petrol V8 producing 500 brake horsepower and only 770 Newton meters of torque. And that's sent to all four wheels through an 8-speed automatic gearbox. Now, that is a serious amount of performance, a major jump over the regular Q8, and is only 91 horsepower down on the RS Q8. Now, this motor here is actually the same that you'll find in the RS Q8 and also the Urus. Now, the Urus produces 650 horsepower, but again, half the price, 500 horsepower. Now, it doesn't come as a huge surprise that the inside of the SQ8 is pretty much exactly the same as a normal Q8, but that's by no means a bad thing, and there are some subtle differences, such as these S seats, for instance, which are really nice. They kind of hug you really nicely with good support at the sides, and they've also got a diamond finish, so they look really luxurious. We've also got Alcantara on the doors here, Alcantara on the headlining as well. And depending which model you go for, you can actually get a flat bottom steering wheel. So if you go for an SQ8 or the Black Edition, you get a flat bottom steering wheel, but in the Vorsprung it comes as a round wheel, although I'm sure you can probably spec a flat or round wheel on all the other ones if you ask Audi really nicely. And the reason they've started introducing round wheels again is apparently they asked customers, do you want a flat bottom steering wheel? And they said no. So they put a round wheel in instead. So as I was saying, this is the Vorsprung, it's the top spec model. So we also have carbon fibre here in the centre console and along the dashboard. It's got a gloss finish and it looks absolutely fantastic. And while this car doesn't exactly scream lightweight performance car, everybody loves a bit of carbon fibre. And that brings me on to pricing because, as I've said, there are 3 different trim levels to choose from. You've got the SQ8, you've got the Black Edition, and then you've got the Vorsprung. The SQ8 is £80,000, the Black Edition £85,000, and the Vorsprung that we see here is £104. But it's also worth bearing in mind that paint costs £750, no matter which one you go for. So you need to add nearly £1,000 to all of those prices if you don't want this to just come out of the factory in bare metal. Although that would look really cool. Now, there aren't huge differences between the cars really, although I did mention a couple of mechanical differences that you get on the Vorsprung cars. But the great thing is about the SQ8 is it's really well equipped. So you get dual screens in the centre of the dash here. We've got one that is the infotainment screen, and then below that you've got a big panel for the climate settings. Now, in a lot of cars, this is a right mess to use and really fiddly, but Audi is one of the first to do it. They really nailed it, and it's also got haptic feedback as well. So if I want to increase the heat, I can just do it through that and decrease it like so. Really easy to use. The center screen is very simple. It's starting to look a little bit dated now compared to the likes of the systems that you get in BMW and Mercedes, but it still does the job. The only frustrating thing is that it's haptic feedback on here, and you kind of just want it to be a one touch does all. So you can be driving along and you'll press a button and it doesn't click properly because you didn't press hard enough. We've also got Audi's virtual cockpit, which is absolutely superb. Really easy to read, nice and customizable. I still think it's one of the best out there and was also one of the first as well. You also got some S graphics on here as well. Because this is more of a performance car, we have some performance settings to go into as well. Rear space is also great, and you still get the perforated leather in the back there, and there's plenty of boot space, 605 litres, which is more than enough even with that coupe-like roofline. A couple of years ago, I drove the SQ7 and SQ7 diesel variants back to back, and it was a really interesting comparison because you could see which cars kind of needed the S treatment and which one didn't. And I felt like the SQ7 didn't make all that much sense when it felt like such a family car, whereas the SQ8, being a more performance-focused SUV, it kind of helped that it was a bit more, well, performance-focused with the S variant. But now we've got rid of the diesel and we've got the petrol version, this kind of feels like what the Q8 wanted to be all along. This is a car that doesn't just look like a performance car on stilts, it really behaves like one. First of all, the engine. Oh my goodness. It now sounds like this glorious, powerful, muscly SUV. You've got that really grumbling V8 in the background and it sounds fantastic. We actually had an M5 competition here recently. Big V8 producing over 600 horsepower, and I think this sounds much better. It just seems to flow a little bit more freely, and while I think there's some sound generator going on inside the cockpit, it sounds amazing on the outside. But sound is nothing without performance, and this SQ8 is so fast. I just feel like it's the real sweet spot of feeling like you have endless power and endless torque without it feeling overwhelming. I can put my foot down in this car and get a real roar from the V8 without breaking the speed limit. And while I've got the car in dynamic, the adaptive air suspension is in its stiffest setting, and it's got a really tough job of keeping this car level when it weighs north of 2 tons. Now, this being the Vorsprung car as well, we also have the anti-roll system, and it just does a superb job of keeping the car completely level. But also when we have it in the dynamic mode, we also lower the car as well. With air suspension we can go up and we can go down. And so the car can sit really squat, really nice and low to the road. And yes, you still feel like you're in an SUV, but it does feel a little bit more purposeful than just a regular Q8 or even a Q7. I'm not entirely sure that anti-roll is necessarily needed, because I drove the SQ7 very recently. In fact, if you want to watch my review of that, click the link in the top right hand corner. That didn't have the anti-roll system on it, and in all fairness it felt very similar to this. So instead of spending north of 100 grand on the Vorsprung edition, you might be able to get a very similar driving experience just for going for the cheaper model at 80. And while it's super fast, it's not the most engaging of cars. True, it feels remarkable how flat it is when you fling it around a corner or if you really fly over a roundabout. But when you actually are in the corners, yes, the steering is heavy, but it doesn't really relate all that well to what the front wheels are doing. It just kind of feels like it's heavy for the sake of being heavy, rather than trying to make you feel like you're driving this big and powerful car. Now, of course, we don't have to have it in dynamic all the time, though I'm sure you will be tempted to do so, and we can put it into comfort, which will put the suspension in its most comfortable setting, and it'll also ease up on the throttle and brake calibration, and it now becomes a lot more like a regular Q8, which is a lot like a Q7. And the Q7 is a very, very good car. It's not all great though, because even though I've been doing a fair amount of hooning today, driving to our film location required me to come out of London and drive on the M25 and do a fair amount of motorway miles. And while I was coming out of London, I averaged between 5 and 10 mpg, and then when I got onto the motorway it was closer to 25, 26, and that just wasn't a problem with the diesel. In the diesel you'd be getting north of 40 mpg or closer to 50. So it's just a bit frustrating that, yes, the demonisation of diesel means that nobody was going to buy it anyway, and the petrol does suit the character of the SQ8 more than the diesel does, but it's still very thirsty, and that even comes with cylinder deactivation tech. So the engine is working really hard to try and save you some precious fuel, and it's still very thirsty indeed. But then you think about it, and the SQ8 almost seems like a bit of a bargain, because it's essentially a cut price Urus. A Urus is north of £170,000. And while it is more powerful and it comes with a Lamborghini badge and is more Lamborghini underneath, you've actually got the same underpinnings of what you have in the Q8, the SQ8. And that's why I think this really is the sweet spot. You have something that, I guess if you squint a bit, doesn't look that different to the Urus. It's got a nice big V8 and you're not paying nearly as much. And you can get it in this amazing yellow, which certainly turns heads. And it's going to seem even more like a bargain when you pick one of these up with a few thousand miles on the clock on the nearly new market, because it's a big German performance SUV and they're not exactly known for retaining their values. So why not go to YesAuto.com, go check out the new or used SQ8s and Uruses and just see the price difference, because yes, this isn't a Urus, but you're getting a fair amount of the driving experience for less than half the price.